The man I replaced at Black Ridge Lookout gave me the rule while he was handing over the keys. If you hear someone climbing the stairs after dark, he said, do not shine the light on their face. He said it in the same way a man might remind you to latch a window before a storm. We were standing on the catwalk 40 feet above the ridge, with miles of timber spread out below us in dark green folds. Far to the west, thunderheads were building over the mountains, turning blue in the late afternoon light. I remember waiting for him to smile. He didn't. His name was Alan Mercer. He had worked Black Ridge for 11 seasons, and he had looked like the tower had slowly made him out of old wood and cigarette smoke. Sun-browned skin, pale eyes, a tremor in his right hand that disappeared whenever he touched the railing. What happens if I do? I asked. He looked down at the stairs instead of at me. And then he said, it'll know you saw it. I laughed once, mostly because the silence after that was worse than the sentence. Alan didn't react. He just finished the handoff in a flat, practiced voice. Radio frequencies, smoke report procedures, weather logs, where the spare fuel was kept, which window stuck when the temperature dropped. I listened, but not well. My mind kept circling back to the rule and trying to decide what kind of a man says something like that with a straight face. A superstitious one, I figured. A lonely one. Maybe that was unfair. Maybe it was just easier to think that than admit the rule had gotten under my skin. At that point, I had been sleeping badly for months. My divorce had finalized in March. After that, my drinking got ugly, then stopped all at once after I put my truck in a ditch and woke up with blood in my mouth and no memory of the last 10 miles. I had been sober 83 days when I hiked up to Black Ridge. Long enough for the shakes to stop, not long enough for the nights to get easier. I took the lookout job because I thought isolation might simplify me. No bars, no traffic, no people asking if I was okay in that careful voice people use when they've already decided you aren't. Just a tower, a mountain, and enough silence to empty a man out. When Alan finally shouldered his pack, he paused at the top of the stairs. Radio works when it feels like it, he said. Weather turns fast. Keep the windows cracked during lightning. He took 3 steps down, then stopped and looked back. And after dark, he said, if you hear climbing, don't be curious. Then he left me alone on the mountain. Black Ridge Lookout sat on the bald shoulder of a peak in the Bitterroots, a glass-walled cabin mounted on timber stilts above a steep slope of shale and scrub pine. It had been built in 1934 and looked every year of it. The cabin was barely larger than a cheap motel room. Cot against one wall, propane stove, shelves of canned food, weather logs, old Forest Service binders, and paperbacks with swollen spines. In the center stood the Osborne Firefinder, a circular map table used to triangulate smoke columns. Outside, a narrow catwalk wrapped all 4 sides of the room. The stairs dropped from the south side in 2 steep runs to the ridge below. If anyone came up them, I would hear every step. That thought settled in me the first night and never left. The first few days were easier than I expected. Mornings were cold and clean. I'd wake up to pale light filling the windows, boil coffee on the stove, and step onto the catwalk with a mug warming my hands while the mountain ranges revealed themselves one by one as the fog burned off the valleys. Some days I saw hawks riding thermals below me. Some days deer moved at the tree line far down slope, so still they looked carved from shadow. I logged temperature, humidity, wind direction, cloud cover. I checked for smoke every 15 minutes. I read old entries in the weather books written in neat block letters by men who had spent whole summers alone in that room without losing their minds. At night, the tower changed. The windows stopped feeling like a view and started feeling like exposure. The forest below became one dark body. Wind moved through it in long, slow shivers. Moonlight sometimes silvered the higher ridges, but the lower slopes stayed black, with the trees packed tightly enough to hide anything. It wasn't the silence that got me. It was the feeling inside the silence, the sense that the whole mountain was listening. On the fourth night, I heard something walking beneath the tower. A slow crunch through loose rock, then another, then another. It moved in a wide circle around the stilts. I froze with my hand on the lantern knob. The sound passed under the north windows, then the west, then faded before returning on the south side. Not random movement, not the rustle of an animal wandering. A full deliberate circuit, like someone inspecting a house. I crossed to the south window and looked down, but the tower cast a block of darkness around its own base, and beyond that the ridge fell into brush and trees striped with moonlight. Nothing moved. The footsteps stopped directly below me. A few seconds later, one of the support posts knocked softly from underneath. Once. Not an impact, not an accident. A test. I stood there for several minutes, barely breathing. My body understood fear before my mind had found anything sensible to attach it to. Every muscle in my back had gone tight. Eventually, the night settled again. At dawn, I climbed down and checked the ground. The ridge was mostly hard shale, but a few yards from the tower I found a patch of mud near a runoff channel. Something had passed through it. The tracks looked almost human. Bare feet, long toes, narrow arches. But the stride was wrong. Too wide, too far apart. And the impressions were deepest at the front, as if whatever made them walked on the balls of its feet with the heels barely touching. I stared at them for a long time. Then I looked back at the tower and had the ridiculous feeling that I was being watched from the windows. That afternoon, I radioed district dispatch. Probably a bear, the woman said through static. Bears don't leave tracks like that. A pause. Mountain lion, maybe? Mountain lions don't knock on support posts. Another pause. Longer this time. How's the sleep up there? I nearly laughed. About the same as anywhere else. First week can get to people. I'm not seeing things. I didn't say you were. The line crackled. I waited for her to say something useful, but she didn't. That night, I left the lantern burning until sunrise. The first step on the stairs came at 11:23. A single dry creak from outside, unmistakable in the stillness. I sat up on the cot so fast my neck spasmed. Then another step. Then another. Each one separated by enough silence to make it worse. No hurry, no hesitation. Just a steady climb by something that knew exactly how long it would take me to imagine it. I stood in the center of the room staring at the door. The searchlight was mounted beside the south windows. An old portable unit with a pistol grip and a broad steel reflector. I kept looking at it. Alan's warning echoed in my head with stupid clarity. Don't shine the light on their face. The steps reached the upper landing. Then they stopped. I could hear nothing now except wind and my own breathing. And then, just outside the door, something exhaled. It wasn't the breath of a tired person after a climb. It sounded wet, close, as if it were pressing itself against the wood. and taking in the smell of the room behind it. The knob never turned. No voice called out. After a long minute, I heard the boards creak again as it moved away, crossed the catwalk, and descended the stairs, one patient step at a time. As you could imagine, I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, there were scratches on the outside of the door. 4 of them. Long, pale grooves dragged through red paint from chest height to the threshold. 2 close together for a bear, 2 straight for accidental damage. They looked like marks made by fingers that ended in something harder than nails. I called dispatch again. No one answered for nearly an hour. When a man finally came on, his voice was thin with interference. "Black Ridge, go ahead." I described the scratches. He was quiet for so long I thought the line had died. And then he said, "Stay inside after sunset." That's it? For now. The radio popped with static. Then, underneath the noise, another voice slid through. "Let me in." Every hair in my body stood up. It wasn't loud. It wasn't distorted. It sounded close enough that I turned and looked over my shoulder, even though I knew no one was there in the room. "Black Ridge?" the dispatcher said. "You still there?" "Yeah," I said, though my mouth had gone dry. "Still here." But after that, the tower no longer felt remote. It felt found. That afternoon, the heat sat low over the mountain, and the windows reflected my own face back at me, drawn, unshaven, eyes red from lack of sleep. More than once I caught movement in the glass and turned. Sure, someone had passed outside. By sunset, I had decided to leave in the morning. I made coffee just to have something hot in my hands, and sat beside the radio until full dark. At 10:58, I heard movement outside the south windows. Not footsteps, a dragging sound. Slow, irregular, like something wet being pulled across the boards. Then my own voice said quietly from outside the glass, "Caleb." I didn't answer. "Caleb." It said again, and this time, the rhythm sounded wrong. A little too much weight on the first syllable, like someone trying on an accent. I stared at the floor. The voice moved to the west side of the tower. I could hear the catwalk creak under it. Then it spoke in Alan's voice. "Don't be curious." What came after sounded like laughter, but only barely. It sounded like several human sounds stitched together badly and pushed through a throat not built for them. I pressed both hands over my ears and kept them there until I heard the stairs groan beneath it as it went back down. At dawn, I packed. I left half the supplies, took the radio, flare gun, canteen, and what food I could carry, and started down the trail just after first light. I made it maybe a mile. The trail curved through a stand of lodgepole pine and ended at 3 fallen trunks laid across it in a tight crisscross. Fresh wood, raw bright splinters. Too deliberate to be natural. I stepped closer and saw that the bark on one trunk had been raked away in 4 long parallel furrows, deep enough to expose the pale wet wood underneath. My stomach dropped. Then, from somewhere downslope through the trees, I heard the unmistakable wooden creak of someone climbing the tower stairs. I went cold all over. The tower was behind me, high above me, hidden by the ridge. There was no way I should have been able to hear it from there. Another creak. Same slow cadence as the night before. I stood there listening, and the truth came to me in pieces. Whatever was on that mountain wasn't confined to the tower, and the sound of the stairs was no longer tied to where the stairs actually were. It was using them, calling me with them. I turned and ran back uphill so fast I tasted blood. When I reached the lookout, the door was standing open. I know I had locked it. I know it with the certainty of ritual. Inside, the room looked untouched at first. Then I saw the note I had left on the table in case someone came looking for me. It was still there. Only beneath my handwriting was a second line written in tall, spidery letters that pressed so hard the pen had nearly torn the paper. Don't go down after dark. And below that, in smaller letters, I already did. I bolted the door, checked every window latch twice, then sat on the floor with the flare gun in my lap and the searchlight beside me while the light outside slowly drained out of the sky. At some point, smoke appeared far to the west. At first, I thought it was a bruised cloud bank. Then it thickened into a gray column. An instinct cut through panic long enough for me to recognize a fire starting somewhere beyond the next drainage. I radioed it in. No answer. I tried again. Only static. Then, under the static, a murmur or two patterned to be random. Voices crossing over each other, fragments of tone with no clear words. I shut the radio off. Outside, darkness pressed close to the glass. The first step came at 10:14. Then another. And then another. I gripped the flare gun so hard my hand hurt. The climb was slower this time, almost ceremonial. The boards complained softly under each footfall. It reached the catwalk and stopped outside the south windows. I kept my eyes on the floor, but I could sense the shape of it beyond the glass, something tall enough to blot out part of the starlight. Then Mara's voice came from outside. Not the angry voice from the end of our marriage, not the exhausted voice from court. A softer one I remembered from earlier years. "Caleb?" it said. "Please." My throat tightened. The thing moved a few boards to the left. The glass clicked softly beneath its touch. "You have to look at me." Now it was my mother's voice, dead 6 years. I made a small, frightened sound before I could stop myself. The tower shuddered with a heavy impact from below, as if something had slammed into one of the support posts. Then again. A third time hard enough to rattle the windows and their frames. Pans shifted on the stove. A spoon jumped off the counter. The voice outside changed again, faster now, circling through tones and people with frantic excitement. Alan, Mara, my mother, the dispatcher, my own voice, then one I didn't know at all, and then all of them at once, whispering through the glass. "Look at me." I broke. Maybe anyone would have. Maybe not. But fear had been tightening inside me for days, and curiosity is just fear leaning forward. I grabbed the searchlight, swung toward the south windows, and hit the switch. The beam exploded across the catwalk, the railing, empty boards, then dipped. What it found was hanging upside down beneath the outer lip of the catwalk, clinging to the tower with 4 long white limbs that looked almost boneless until they moved. Its body was hairless and stretched thin over a framework of shifting joints. It had the proportions of something that had studied humans from a distance and gotten the idea wrong. Its skin was the color of something that had never seen sunlight. One hand gripped the railing above it. Another braced against the tower post. The fingers were too many, too long. each tipped with black hooks pressed into the wood. Its face was tilted toward me. For a second it looked smooth and blank. Then the beam centered on it, and the front of its head opened vertically, from brow to throat, like wet fabric tearing down the middle. There were no eyes inside, no tongue, only layers of pale inner tissue folded around a dark cavity filled with dozens of small moving shapes. I thought they were teeth at first, and then one flexed, and I realized it looked like a tiny human hand. As I watched, skin shifted across the opening, and something like a face surfaced beneath it. My face. Not attached, not real. More like a memory pressing through its thin skin. My features stretched there in a slick impression, mouth opening in a silent copy of my shock. Then it changed. Mara, my mother, Alan. Each face sliding across that slit head one after another, half-formed and desperate, as if the thing stored people the way other creatures store food. The beam shook in my hands. Then the thing understood what had happened. It knew I was seeing it as itself. The whole body tightened in a violent insect-like recoil. And then it moved. It came up the wall so fast I barely tracked it. One moment it was hanging below the catwalk. The next it slammed into the south windows hard enough to burst one pane into cracks. I stumbled backward. The beam swung wild across the room. Another impact hit the door. Another hit the wall beneath the north windows. The tower screamed on its supports. A black hooked hand punched through the cracked glass and scrambled inside, opening and closing with blind precision. I fired the flare gun. The flare struck somewhere deep in the open seam of its face and detonated in a blast of red-white light. Its scream was not one voice. It was all of them. Every stolen voice bursting out together. Mara, Alan's, my own, and others I didn't recognize, layered into a sound so wrong it seemed to come from every corner of the room at once. The thing tore backward out of the window and into a spray of glass and sparks. Burning fluid splashed the catwalk. The smell was sweet, rotten, chemical, ancient. Then came a frenzy of impacts and skittering movement around the tower as it fled downward, no longer bothering with the stairs. Then silence. Real silence. I stayed on the floor until dawn with the empty flare gun in one hand and the kitchen knife in the other. When daylight finally came, the south side of the lookout was scorched black around the shattered window. Melted streaks had dried across the boards outside. The smoke column in the west had grown into a true wildfire. I got through to dispatch at 6:12. This time someone answered immediately. By noon a helicopter had landed below the ridge. 2 rangers and a district supervisor came up the stairs. They took one look at the broken glass, the burn marks, the claw furrows in the wood, and then at me sitting against the wall with my eyes open too wide, and none of them asked the obvious questions. The older ranger stepped to the window and studied the damage. Then he turned and said, "You used the light." It wasn't a question. I nodded. He closed his eyes for a second. The supervisor looked away toward the trees. On the helicopter ride down, nobody tried to tell me it had been a bear. At district, they gave me water, bandaged my hands, and had me write a statement no one would ever use officially. The wildfire became the public story. So did an accidental flare discharge that damaged government property. The private conversation happened later in a small office with the blinds half closed. The supervisor sat across from me with my incident form in front of her. "How long?" she asked. "Had you been waking up at night feeling like something was in the room before you came to Blackridge?" I stared at her. Why would you ask me that? Because we ask everybody. I said nothing. She folded her hands. It doesn't start on the mountain, she said. A numb coldness moved through me. What doesn't? She looked toward the window, then very quietly. Whatever finds the ones who can hear the stairs. That was the closest anyone came to explaining it. No report was ever filed about an animal. No real investigation followed. Black Ridge Lookout was closed for the season 2 days later, officially because of the fire. I went back to town, got a third-floor apartment, and told myself elevation mattered, concrete mattered, street lights mattered. I found warehouse work on the night shift because sleep no longer felt like rest. It felt like surrender. For a while, the city helped. Sirens, traffic, neighbors, the steady human noise of other lives moving nearby. Enough to blunt memory. Enough that some mornings I could almost believe what happened on that mountain had been the shape exhaustion gave to loneliness. And then October came. The nights cooled, windows stayed shut. And 3 weeks ago, I woke up at 2:17 in the morning with the same absolute certainty that something had been standing beside my bed. I live on the 3rd floor. There's no balcony outside my bedroom window, no fire escape, no tree close enough to reach the glass. But after a minute, from just outside the window, I heard old wood take a patient wait. One step, a pause, then another, slowly climbing. If you're brave enough for more, subscribe now and join me for the next story. The night is far from over. Good night.